Section 37 of Essays on Art. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Essays on Art by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Translated by Samuel Gray Ward. Section 37. The Pictures of Philostratus. Part 14. Hercules and Telephus. We now find the hero in the tenderest relation, that of father and son. Another instance of the flexibility of Grecian imagination. We find the hero at the highest point of humanity. Unfortunately, the necessity of representing religious occurrences has deprived modern art of its fairest subjects, as the relation of father to son, fosterer to fostered, instructor to pupil, of which ancient art has bequeathed to us the most exquisite examples. The lover of art has only to open the volume of Herculean antiquities to convince himself of the excellence of the picture which we are now called to speak of. Here stands Hercules, heroically appointed, none of his renowned attributes wanting. The club serves him to lean upon, covered with the lion's skin that hangs from it. He holds the quiver and arrows beneath his arm. He stands at rest, his left hand behind him, his feet crossed, his back towards us, turning round his head adorned with crown and fillet, and looking at the same time at the little child who is sucking at the dough. The child and dough bring us back to Myron's cow. Here is an equally beautiful, nay, a more elegant, sentimental group than that. Not so completely self-centered as the other, because it makes a part of a greater whole. The boy looks at his father as he sucks. He is half grown, a not unconscious heroic child. How admirably is the remainder of the picture filled up! An eagle stands solemn in the center. A lion is lying on one side, to signify that this mountain-top is, through daemonic and heroic presence, become a peaceful paradise. But how shall we address this female form that stands in such mighty repose opposite the hero? It is the heroine of the mountain. Her look is fixed, like that of a mask, and after the daemon wont, taking no part in what occurs. The crown of flowers upon her head has reference to the blooming plains of the landscape, the basket of grapes and pomegranates to the garden-like abundance of the hills, and the fawn by her side shows the excellent pasture that the heights afford. He, too, has reference to the qualities of the place, without participation in the beauty and tenderness of the passing scene. On the other side, a winged goddess accompanies the hero, now become a father, crowned as he is. She has shown him the way through the wilderness, and now points out to him the strange nursing and the happy growth of his son. We do not name her, but the ears of corn she bears indicate her office of nourishing and fostering care. Perhaps it was she who provided the hind for the suckling child. Every artist ought once in his life to attempt this picture, to try and see how far it is possible to restore what it loses in the relation, without doing injury to the leading idea of the self-contained composition. Then the question would arise how the characters could be supported and exalted. This picture, completely carried out in all its parts, would furnish the most unanswerable proof of the cultivation and skill of the artist. Hercules and Thyladamas. In the hero, whose highest merit lies in his mighty limbs, it is natural to expect an appetite commensurate with his work, and thus we find this attribute celebrated and depicted. Once, being overcome with hunger, it was towards evening, in the roughest part of the Isle of Rhodes, inhabited by the Lindians, he finds a husbandman turning up a wretched piece of land with a ploughshare. Hercules tries to bargain for his oxen, but the man will not let them go. The hero takes one without ceremony, kills and cuts it up, makes a fire, and begins to prepare a savory meal. Here he stands, his attention absorbed by the meat which is broiling on the coals. He seems to wait with the greatest appetite for it to be done, and to quarrel with the fire for cooking it so slowly. The content that overspreads his visage seems to be nowise disturbed when the husbandman, enraged at the loss of his useful beasts, falls upon him with curses and stones. The demigod stands before us in the grand form of Hercules. The countryman is an old, rough, rugged, robust man. His body is clothed, leaving only the knees and arms bare to show his strength. The Lindians, in memory of this occurrence, from that time forth did honor to Hercules by curses and stone-throwing, and he, in his inexhaustible good nature, gave them in return 1,000 blessings. When art busies itself long with a subject, even the most dignified, it at last masters it completely, and extracts from it a light and comic side. Such was the origin of the present picture. The subject is a very alluring one to work upon. A clear heroic nature, standing in contrast with rude, violent physical forces. The one full of repose, but inspiring confidence by his form. The other striking by his energetic action. If we now consider the surrounding objects, the second ox still at the plough, the patch of turned-up soil, the neighboring rocks happily illuminated by the fire, would not this in every sense constitute a worthy companion to Ulysses among the Cyclops? Hercules and Admetus. With this serene picture, we conclude our present labors. It was sketched some years since by a true fellow-laborer in the field of art, as an experiment how far we can approach the antique treatment of such subjects. The picture is about twice as long as it is broad, and contains 3 separate groups which are artistically connected. In the midst seats Hercules, of gigantic stature, leaning on a pillow, and by this posture brought into proportion with the other standing figures. The table before him, and the wine vessel thrown on one side, speak of the great satisfaction he has enjoyed, and which would have been enough for anyone else. But a new meal must be spread for the hero, in which service we see 3 serving men busied. One of them is ascending the steps with an enormous roast upon a mighty dish. Another seems hardly able to bear the heavy bread basket. They meet the third, bound for the cellar, swinging an emptied can by the handle and clattering with the cover. He seems to be not altogether pleased with the thirst of the mighty guest. All 3 appear to speak with discontent of the hero's freedom, who is snapping his fingers, that favorite expression of careless content among the ancients. On his left stands Admetus, offering a bowl, with the quiet manner of a friendly host, thus hiding from his guest the sad scene, which is separated from the above-described space by a curtain, but is exposed to the spectator. From this dark corner, where a number of disconsolate women mourn their departed mistress, a boy steps forth, who takes his father by the cloak to draw him in to participate in the unhappy event in his family. The inner and outer are connected by the form and action of this child, and the eye gladly returns to the guest and the servants on the broad platform in front, and the field beyond them, where you see a domestic busy cutting in pieces a swine that hangs up, to signify the inordinate appetite of the guest, and alluding playfully to the impossibility of appeasing it. But it is impossible to express in words either the well-matured composition, the grace of detail, or the happy effect of contrast in light, shade, and color, and we therefore hope to have an opportunity to present to the lovers of art an engraving from it that may illustrate, and, if possible, justify by example our previous remarks. If the reader will now bestow a glance upon the specification, wherein we enumerated the whole of the Philostratic pictures, he will share our regret at being obliged to break off in the midst of so agreeable an exhibition. Our preliminary labors lay many years useless. A fortunate moment enabled us to take them in hand once more. May what we have brought forward be not only read and figured to the imagination, but be translated into the active powers of young men. Such examples are of more service than all the maxims in the world, and which, after all, each one interprets according to his own notions, for these examples carry the senses with them, upon which everything depends, and quicken where there is room for quickening. End of section 37. Recording by Todd.
Section 38 of Essays on Art. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Essays on Art by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Translated by Samuel Gray Ward. Section 38. Ancient and Modern. Part 1. Having been obliged in what goes before to say so much in favor of antiquity, and particularly of the plastic arts of those times, it was my wish that I might not be misunderstood, which so often happens where the reader, instead of preserving a just balance, throws himself at once into the opposite scale. I therefore seized the present opportunity to explain what my meaning was, having reference under the symbol of plastic art to the never-ceasing life of human actions and affairs. A young friend, Karl Ernst Schubart, in his pamphlet A Critique on Goethe, which in every sense calls for my esteem and thanks, says, "I do not agree in opinion with those worshippers of the ancients, among whom is Goethe himself, who maintains that in high and complete development of humanity nothing has ever been arrived at to compare with the Greeks." Fortunately, Schubart's own words give us an opportunity to adjust this difference, where he says, "As to our Goethe, let me say that I prefer Shakespeare to him, for this reason, that in Shakespeare I seem to find a strong, unconscious man, who is able, with perfect certainty and without reasoning, reflecting, subtilizing, and classifying, to seize with never-failing hand the true and false in man, and express it with so much nature, whilst in Goethe, though I recognize the same ultimate aim, I am always fighting with obstacles, and must be always taking heed lest I accept for plain truth what is only an exhibition of as plain error." Here our friend hits the nail on the head, for in that very point where he places me below Shakespeare do we stand below the ancients. And what is it we advance concerning the ancients? Any talent the development of which is not favored by time and circumstances, and must on that account work its way through 1,000 obstacles and get rid of 1,000 errors, must always be at a disadvantage when compared with a contemporary one that has the opportunity to cultivate itself with facility and act to the extent of its capacity without opposition. It often happens that persons advanced in life are able, out of the fullness of their experience, to advance something that will explain or strengthen an assertion, which shall be my excuse for relating the following anecdote. A practiced diplomatist, who had desired my acquaintance after the first interview, when he had had but little opportunity of seeing or conversing with me, remarked to his friends, "Voilà un homme qui a un des grands chagrins." These words set me to thinking. The skillful physiognomist's eye did not deceive him, only he laid to the effect of suffering the phenomenon that should have been ascribed to opposition. An observant, straightforward German might have said, "This is a man who has had a hard time of it, is soured." Since then the signs of past experience and of persevering activity do not disappear from the face, it is no wonder if all that remains of us and our strivings should bear the same impress, and indicate to the attentive observer a mode of being whose aim has been to preserve its balance alike under circumstances of happiest development or narrowest limitation, and maintain the persistency, if it could not always the highest dignity of human existence. But letting pass old and new, past and present, let us generally lay it down that every artistic production places us in the same state of mind the author was in. If that was clear and bright, we shall feel free. If that was narrow, timid, and anxious, we shall feel limited in the same proportion. Upon reflection, we would add that we speak now only of treatment. Material and import do not enter into the consideration. If, having reference to this principle, we look around in the world of art, we uphold that every work will afford us pleasure, which the artist himself produced with ease and facility. What amateur does not rejoice in the possession of a successful drawing or etching of our Ch38? We see in them such an immediate apprehension of nature as we know it, that they leave nothing to wish for. But he would not be able to go beyond his mark and line without losing all the advantage he derives from his peculiar qualifications. We will even go farther, and confess that we have derived great pleasure from mannerists, when the manner has not been carried too far, and that we are pleased with the possession of their works. The artists who have received this name have been gifted with uncommon talent, but became early aware that, in the state of the times, as well as of the schools into which they were cast by fate, there was no room for minute labor, but that they must choose their part and perfect themselves speedily. They therefore made themselves a language into which they could without farther trouble translate with ease and dexterity all visible subjects, and exhibit to us representations of all sorts of scenes with greater or less success. Thus whole nations have been entertained and hoodwinked for long periods of time, until at last one or another artist has found the way back to nature and a higher feeling of art. We may perceive by the Herculean antiquities how the ancients also fell into this kind of manner, only their models were too great, too present, fresh, and well preserved for their circle of artists to be able to lose themselves entirely in insignificance. Let us now assume a higher and more agreeable point of view, and consider the talent with which Raphael was so singularly gifted. Born with the happiest natural gifts at a time when art combined the most conscientious labor, attention, industry, and truth, the young man was already led by excellent masters to the threshold, and had only to raise his foot to enter the temple. Disciplined by Peter Perugino in the most careful elaboration, his genius was developed by Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. Neither of these artists, in spite of their long life and the cultivation of their powers, seem ever to have reached the true enjoyment of artistic production. The former, if we look closely, wearied himself with thought and dissipated his powers in mechanical inquiries, and we have to blame the latter for spending his fairest years among stone quarries, getting out marble blocks and slabs, so that, instead of carrying out his intention of carving all the heroes of the Old and New Testament, he has left only his Moses as an example of what he could and should have done. Raphael, on the other hand, was at work during his whole life, increasing all the time in facility. We see in him the development of the intellectual and active powers preserve such remarkable balance that it may be affirmed that no modern artist has possessed such purity and completeness of thought and such clearness of expression. In him we have another instance of a talent that pours out to us the freshest water from the purest source. He is never affected, but always feels, thinks, and works like a Greek. We see the fairest talent developed in the most favorable hours. The same thing occurred under like conditions and circumstances in the time of Hercules. It may therefore be always maintained that native talent is indispensable to production indeed, but equally indispensable is the commensurate development in the provinces of nature and art. Art cannot dispense with its prerogatives, and cannot achieve perfection without favorable outward circumstances. End of section 38.